The year's 2045, people, and the real world is a terrible place to live in. So people would rather live in technology. Much like 2018, except nowhere near as cool. Let's talk about Ready Player One. Reason to see Ready Player number one. Directing and visual effects. Alright, so there's been a lot of hype around this movie. A lot of hype and a lot of anticipation. What you gotta give this film credit for no matter what is it's Spielberg definitely returning to some awesome ass spectacle. And the visual effects in this movie are dynamite. We can all get on board with that. Early on in the film, there's an opening action sequence that is teased all over the trailers. And I just remember being in that theater going, oh wow, whoa, look at that. This is amazing.
It's impressive in the way that he's able to point and capture and, you know, really make the action scenes cacophonous but also dynamic.
Yeah.
Not that this movie is only about the 80s nostalgia factor, but given that there is a heavy 80s element, it is kind of cool to see Spielberg come full circle because he's definitely one of the voices that had a hand in crafting what so many people are nostalgic for about the 80s, what this movie is an odd way a love letter to. In a strange way, it's very meta that way because it's Spielberg coming full circle.
He's even paying homage to himself at times. In terms of films that he's done in like the past 10 years or so that just aim to be entertainment, I'm usually have a hard time getting on board with just finding this to be a thoroughly throughout a really entertaining time. I think he really succeeds here. I was really entertained pretty much for the entire film. It's not like the best scripted movie in the world, but in terms of a visual feast, a lot of futuristic sci-fi excitement, he totally delivers on it, and I walked away pretty happy with the film.
Yeah, and even if you're not 100% pulled in, I can't imagine you won't find some of these places and locations and moments dazzling. Like there is definitely something in there that you're going to be awestruck by.
Because there's also a wide variety of locations in the Oasis. It's like a much bigger world than the real world.
But there's one scene, I'm not going to spoil it, but they jump into a specific movie, and that sequence alone is pretty wicked.
It's pretty impressive. And I also want to say that, especially for someone like me who has been actually catching up more on 80s movies lately, I've been getting back into gaming recently. I'm not like heavy into it, but just within 2018 alone, the past 4 months, I beat The Last of Us, I beat Uncharted. I'm only like 2 chapters away from finishing Uncharted 2. And then I've been playing some Resident Evil 6 and my girlfriend the least like Resident Evil. But just getting back my mind in touch with that felt especially awesome to me to be like, wow, this is like a real fucking video game. Which is awesome. It was sweet.
And I mean, if you look at just the concept, you're like, I guess in the future I could see how this would happen.
Oh, sure. Totally. Especially with VR advancing now.
Ready Player reason to see number 2. Nostalgia and pop culture references.
Okay, I'll be the first to admit, there's plenty of times where we'll throw in footage and I'm like, I remember when I was doing my reaction and I said this about the movie, and then I ended up being right. There's things about it where I was pretty wrong about. I'm not familiar with the book. When I saw the trailers for this, they kept teasing a lot of the same nostalgia references they would be doing in this movie. So I was really under the impression that we're gonna get like a few things that show up for a second. This movie is loaded with, this is the ultimate crossover movie. While the main thing it hones in on is 80s nostalgia, there's pop culture references to modern day things, there's pop culture references to stuff from the 90s, there's a whole wide variety of references in this film, and it's such a big part of the movie. And I think what really impressed me with it was how well justified the movie is. Because in the first 10 to 20 minutes of this movie, they're setting up the world of what the Oasis is. They're setting up that the world also really loves the creator of the Oasis. This character played by Mark Rylance, who won for Bridge of Spies. Another Spielberg film. You see that this guy built the Oasis, and a lot of his love comes from all these things that are being referenced within the movie itself. And because the world loves the creator, it makes sense why they all become obsessed with the same things the creator loves. Hence, you get a bunch of nostalgia and a bunch of references that are so well justified. So when they start showing up on screen, there's a plenty of stuff that just shows up for like a second and it's like whatever. But there's a lot of things they really utilize, things I don't want to give away. I was really amazed by how there was some badass shit that goes on in this movie.
Do you hear that, Greg?
What?
That's the sound of millions of Blu-ray players in the future pausing to pick out all the different things that are crammed into this movie.
Yeah, there's sequences where you're like, there's no way I caught every reference.
Yeah, and I mean, if you're a gamer too, you're definitely gonna catch some stuff in there. Like, there's a little something for. I can't imagine that they missed anybody's group entirely. This movie definitely does lean towards the 80s and 80s sensibilities, but there's something in here from everywhere.
Reason to see number 3, the cast. There was a little discussion we had before putting this on the list. There's a difference between cast and characters. Now, while there's some good characters in here, you know, we do a reasons not to see section of this video. The cast, though, regardless, is really good. There's a whole bunch of actors in here. The lead, Ty Sheridan, he does a really good job of what he's given too. No one really talks about the characters when it comes to this movie, but when you think about the performances, especially looking back, I'm like, well, that's a big part of what helped me be invested in this. Like you said, it's definitely more of a plot movie than it
not
is
a character piece at all.
It's nowhere near being a character piece, but the character motives, who the characters are very important to servicing the story. The actors do put in their best, and there's some characters in here that are more fun than others. Mark Rylance clearly was having a lot of fun with his role. Ty Sheridan is more interesting than a lot of the other ones because he's the lead, so he gets more screen time than everyone else.
Yeah, everybody shows up and brings their personality, and I guess I can't entirely. I mean, I would love well-written characters always, but this is a movie that also borrows from types. Like, these characters are types, and it's supposed to harken back to. I felt like I was watching one of those 80s movies, but updated to now in a sort of meta way. So yeah, you do get a lot of cool character actors who all bring a charm, and those are your characters, basically. Reason not to see number 1. Some lackluster elements.
Yeah, there's about 3 things that John and I were able to think of beforehand. Kind of lacked a little bit. Like, how I was talking about in the car was, there's not anything in this movie I actually don't like. There's just some things I felt could have been enhanced or better handled.
Or richer.
Exactly, yeah, that's probably the best word for it. It kind of goes that way for all the characters. There's a couple of characters that, especially towards the end of the movie, Spielberg starts capturing it in a way where he treats it like these characters have some bigger backstory, and I couldn't help but think, these guys definitely had a couple of deleted scenes, didn't they? That kind of gave some exposition as to who the hell these two are. Ben Mendelsohn's character, especially, was one where I was incredibly conflicted in certain areas because Ben Mendelsohn is an amazing actor to me. He actually gets a lot to do in this movie if you really think about it.
He's very involved in this plot.
He's very involved. It was just the way his character was written. He's kind of portrayed as a joke of a villain. He is the villain of the movie, but he's portrayed in a way where you never think he'll have a chance.
And the movie makes it clear this guy doesn't get it.
Yeah, they make him out to be kind of a joke. And I thought the movie could have benefited for some actual intensity if you had Ben Mendelsohn feel like an actual threat and not just some dude who randomly got to this position, you know?
Yeah, because it does hamper for me some of the tension because I never doubted where anything was going to end up. I never thought that anything was truly threatening. I was mostly like, okay, how are we going to figure these obstacles out?
Yeah.
And that's sort of how the tension plays out for me in this movie. Around the time they almost make an interesting choice with Ben Mendelsohn's character, you know, it gets dismantled right away and you're like, oh yeah, you're just a sniveler. That's it.
Yeah,
you know?
It's just because he has so many lines that he gets a lot to do.
And he's a good actor.
He's a good actor,
you know?
yeah.
So, like, he brings things to those scenes, but yeah, he's not an overly threatening villain.
I personally don't really have pacing issues with this movie, but I know other people have had pacing issues with this movie, and I know you have some pacing issues.
Yeah, I mean, it partly, too, is I think you were more pulled in than me, and if you're really pulled in, I don't think you'll notice it so much, and I don't think it was poorly paced, I just thought it was kind of blocky, I guess is the way I would describe it.
It kind of, I can see why one would think that.
It's kind of paced like a brick. You know?
Yeah. And I think the big complaint that I'm hearing a lot of people say, how they felt the real world outside of the Oasis was just really dull and not that interesting. I'm like, well, yeah, that's kind of my response to that is, yeah. Isn't it supposed to be? That's like how they set up the movie, that no one wants to live in the real world. I'm sure he could have done some things to make the real world more interesting, but like when we watch The Matrix...
put stakes in the real world beyond a couple things. Like, make the real world a place that's also important.
Yeah, because they were saying like the real world is just this terrible place to live in now. Let's get a better sense of what they mean by that, you know? That's probably what the element is that people wanted to feel more of. However, I'll say that there's scenes in the real world that are just fine to me.
The most interesting thing to me about the real world scenes was the fact that it looked like they shot those on actual film. The Oasis is almost all effects, so that looked very digital, and the real world looked very film, and that was about the one thing I was like, oh, cool! But the rest of it doesn't seem like much of this matters to the real world, even though it kind of does, but you know that once this all resolves, everyone's just gonna keep escaping the real world. So the real world is kind of a ringer to me in this movie.
I will say there's elements of the production design of the real world that I appreciated, because while the Oasis pays a lot of tribute to 80s nostalgia, I kind of felt like the real world felt in a way how 80s movies portrayed the future.
Yeah, it's very slummy. It's very
Not in like a Neil Blomkamp like realistic kind of way.
I don't know if this is an issue or not, but the real world feels designed but not lived in to me. Oh, it's a cool idea.
That's a good way to put it. Yeah, it's a good way to put it.
But we're never going to spend that much time here. And some of the stuff they seem like they cut out of the movie, like I said, is in the real world, which makes me go, how did you get from here to here, though, if there are real people around trying to, do certain things?
Yeah.
So, yeah, like, it's just kind of a ringer to me in this movie a bit.
Reason not to see, number 2. You just might not be a part of this specific audience. For this kind of movie, it's kind of thick and there's a lot going on. It's very fast-paced in a lot of areas, and when they're in the Oasis, there's a lot of shit thrown at you, and a lot of it is references and nostalgia, and the movie is about that. It's not just some tactic or manipulative thing. It's a part of the world. You just might not be a part of the audience that gives a shit about that kind of thing. If you're into gaming, but you're not into the 80s, you can still like it because of the gaming. But if you're into like the 80s and all that nostalgia, you might be into it because of that. It's a giant blockbuster that's more for a specific kind of audience, honestly.
That is very prevalent at the moment, and fandom and nostalgia are both very big things right now.
But if you're like the Spielberg person who loves like Bridge of Spies and The Post, this might not be your film.
This is like when I watch Stranger Things. It's like there are elements of this that are for me, and for some reason the only response I had to it was, oh, cool. It never swept me personally up, and I'm not 100% sure why that is.
I felt like for most of it, I was pretty swept up. Before watching this movie, I saw the early Twitter reactions to it. I'm like, yeah, it's about 50-50 with everyone on this movie.
If you're looking for something really to connect to, I feel like it's missing that. If all this stuff that everyone loves is your connection point, you're gonna love this.
Yeah, that's what I mean. It's a specific group. Yeah, so in the end, I for me personally, I would say that a lot of what I was worried about and that I was thinking that the movie might do, I will admit that I was wrong. I enjoyed the hell out of it. I think there are so many more reasons to see this movie than there are not to see the movie.
This is a movie you have to check out for yourself. And for me, I think there's a lot of cool stuff in it. I appreciate a lot of it. I think it's cool. I had a good time. I didn't love this. This is a movie that objectively I look at it and I go, yeah, this is really cool. There's a lot of stuff to enjoy here. There's a lot of filmmaking to be appreciated. It's not necessarily, it didn't sweep me up. It's not necessarily my cup of tea all the way, but definitely see it for yourself and check it out. It's pretty cool.
All right, guys. Well, Ready Player One. It came out on Wednesday, so what did you think of Ready Player One? Did it live up to the hype for you? Are you one of the people who was really anticipating it, and did it live up to the hype or not? Leave your comments down below. You guys can subscribe to The Real Rejects. Please click that notification bell so you can get notified when a video is actually out. And check us out on Patreon. Full-length TV show reactions over there. Weekly Q&As. Thank you to everyone who's been joining us over there so far. Would love to have you there.